Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019. We're starting this section from Wedding 5 and we're going to look at resource levelling. The way we left things in the preceding section is that I had assigned the bride and groom to tasks for which they had a level of involvement. And we can see that both of them are significantly over-allocated, particularly during one period in the second half of May, where they have a lot of different things to be doing all at once. You can see the specific tasks that are over-allocated with the indicator in the left-hand column. And I pointed out to you in the preceding section, if we look over at the resource sheet, the two resources that are marked in red are the ones that are over-allocated, so the bride and the groom. And of course, in something like this project, we don't really have the option of, say, having a couple of extra brides or a couple of extra grooms to spread the work over. In another project, such as, for example, the bathroom refit, if the tiler or the plasterer or the bathroom fitter had too much work to do, you could possibly get a second person in to help, but that isn't really an option for us here. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in the preceding section, which of course is a very important thing, is to make sure that you have your default task types set correctly. So let's just take a look at that now. On the schedule page in project options, in scheduling options for this project, note that I have this project selected, so Wedding 5, and the default task type I now have is fixed duration. Note also that I have the checkbox new tasks are effort driven, not checked. Now if I go back to this drop down here for all new projects, my overall default is still a default task type of fixed units. So in the absence of a specific change for a specific project, that is my overall default, fixed units. And you'll obviously need to set that up in the way that suits you. Now it's very likely when you're planning projects and as your projects progress that you will experience over-allocation of resources. And there are a number of ways of resolving these over-allocations, and we're going to be looking at quite a few during the course. But before we do, just one very important point to make is this. There isn't a universal way of resolving over-allocations. The resolution of over-allocations almost always involves understanding the underlying project or the underlying business that your project relates to. Now, one of the key things you normally need to decide is whether to resolve over-allocations manually or automatically. Both of them have a place, and it may well be that you work on the principle that as far as possible you resolve over-allocations automatically, but that you'll revert to manual methods where necessary. It actually wouldn't be that complicated for us to go through and resolve all of the over-allocations in this particular plan manually, but it can be very time-consuming. And automating this process as much as possible is usually the best approach if you can in fact automate it successfully, which is not always the case. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to demonstrate a manual resolution of an over-allocation. And I'm just going to take the first over-allocation here, select wedding dress. And I'm going to show you very quickly how you can resolve this manually. Now the fact that Project 2019 has put that red marker there, that says that this task has over-allocated resources. So it tells you that there's a problem. And it also says right-click for options. And we're really interested in the top 3 options. Now I'm going to start with the second one here, Fix in Task Inspector. We're going to look at the Task Inspector later in the course, so we'll come back to that one. And the third one is Ignore Problems for this task. In the same way that in the preceding section, once or twice I said, let's ignore that warning from the planning wizard, there will be situations where you have an apparent over-allocation, but either you know it's not really a problem for reasons I'll look at later, or you may know that you're going to fix that problem later and don't need to deal with it now. So you do have the option of ignoring a particular problem related to over-allocation. Now the first option is the one that you'll very often use when doing manual resolution, and it's reschedule to an available date. And what you're basically saying to Project 2019 is I want you to find a date when this task can happen and I don't then have an over-allocation against it. And that's what we're going to do here. Now notice the task has been rescheduled, and also notice the little red mark from the left column has gone. And also note that the date, the end date of our project, has pushed right out quite a long way actually. So we've pushed everything related to the wedding dress out to the right because of course that one task, select wedding dress, had a number of successors including order dress, measurements and fittings. And of course that delays the attire summary task, which in turn delays the whole of the preparation phase. And if we look all the way down here now, we can see our wedding date has moved to September the 6th. Now we could go through each of those over-allocated tasks and resolve it manually in that way. But as I say, that would be time consuming and generally speaking, we'd like to automate it. So let's look at how we might possibly do that. Now you might be tempted in this situation to undo what we just did and start again with an automated version of the process. But before we do, I want to demonstrate something else. I'm going to change the view. And the view that we're going to use is one specifically that we use when we're working on leveling resources. So I'm going to click on Other Views, More Views, and I'm going to choose Leveling Gantt. Now the Leveling Gantt view effectively shows you what Project 2019 is doing in terms of leveling the resources on a project. Now when you apply a new view like this, it's very often the case that the time scale is all completely wrong. So let's go back up to the View tab, and in the Zoom group click on Entire Project so that we see the project on the right there. And you note in particular this little coloured bar here against Select Wedding Dress. That bar represents the leveling delay, the amount of delay that was added to that when we did the manual leveling just now. And in fact, we have a set of tools to handle leveling delays. Now, before I use one of those tools, look at the table on the left. Let me just make the name column a little bit wider. And there's a column there, leveling delay. And the current leveling delay on that task is 42 E-days. And E-days are elapsed days. So when we did the manual resource leveling just now, what Project 2019 had to do was to delay that task by 42 elapsed days. And that's the currently applied leveling delay to that task. Now also notice that its successors, which were also delayed, were not delayed because of leveling of themselves. They were delayed because we delayed the select wedding dress task that had the resource over allocation. So their leveling E-days are set at 0 days. They weren't delayed because of a leveling problem. They were delayed because they are successors of a task that had a leveling problem. Now, if I wanted to put this particular project back to the way it was, I could obviously do the undo, but I can also go to the Resource tab and click the button just here, Clear Leveling in the Leveling group. And watch what happens if I clear the leveling. I get an option of clearing it from the whole project or the entire project, or just the selected tasks. And as I've only done one bit of leveling here, I might as well stick with entire project and click on OK. And basically what happens is that the task goes back to where it was before. And now if I revert back to Gantt chart view, it would look exactly how it looked before. And of course, I've got my over allocation indicator on the left there for task 10. Now, before we look at automatically leveling, let me just point something else out. We asked Project 2019 to reschedule select wedding dress to a date where the resource wouldn't be over allocated. You can reschedule these things completely manually yourself. So there will be nothing to stop me going into any of these tasks and changing the start and finish dates. And I could go through all of them and change the start and finish dates manually, schedule them manually, change their task types from auto-scheduled to manually scheduled if necessary, and fix any of these dates in time if I wanted to. But what we want to look at now is the opposite of doing that, and that is putting everything in Project 2019's hands and seeing if it can resolve these over-allocations automatically for us. So I'm back in the regular Gantt chart view, and I go to the Resource tab. And in that level group that we just saw now, there are two buttons there. There's a Level Resource and a Level All. Level Resource gives me the ability to level one or more selected resources. So if all I wanted to do was to level the bride and make sure she's not over-allocated, I can select one resource and then click on Level Now, and Project 2019 will try to level the bride over the project so that she's not over-allocated at any stage. Now it's important to recognise it will try, because it may well be that the constraints, the deadlines, the dependencies, that might mean that she cannot be levelled. There are going to be situations where she's just got too much to do over a period of time. So you may find in many of the projects that you can't completely resolve over allocations, or should I say not in a way that you're 100% happy with. So that's levelling an individual resource. The Level All button basically levels all resources, and if I click on Level All, I may possibly get one or more warnings. Now I haven't at this stage, which is good news. And there we are. Now as you can see, most of the red markers in the first column have gone, and our wedding day is now on January the 23rd, 2020, so the dates have got pushed out a long way. So overall, our schedule is coming together, and we've got some very good aspects of the schedule now because, for example, we have the reception and venue identified, we have the wedding venue identified, and if they're both done before we send out the invitations, that's pretty good. We also have the wedding itself registered and organised, and we also have the wedding itself registered and licensed early on. But when we look at things like caterer, florist, baker, so on and so forth, we're making the short list, and then there's a long time before we book those people. And the booking is probably a little bit too late in the day, ideally. We seem to have left the bookings much too late in the process, whereas with other aspects such as the wedding rings, maybe they're roughly in the right kind of place. But quite often when you look at a schedule after levelling, you'll find that resulting schedule doesn't really tie in with the ideal sequence of events. And there are a number of options you can apply when levelling to help you to get to the kind of sequence of events that you want while still resolving any over allocations. And the use of those options is what we're going to look at in the next section, so please join me for that.